It is Champions Cup week, and what a weekend we have in store. Leinster will be back in Croke Park this Saturday to take on Harlequins, and that is the starter before the meaty main course that is Ronan O'Gara's La Rochelle taking on Munster at the Stade Marcel de Flandre. We also have Ulster travelling to Bordeaux on Sunday for a daunting last 16 tie, while Connacht resume their Challenge Cup campaign at home to Cardiff in Galway on Saturday night. So we have all that to talk about and plenty more on tonight's episode of the Left Wing podcast. I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Luke Fitzgerald and on the line by Jonathan Bradley. And Jonathan, you must love us getting you on after another Ulster victory. It's been a while since we've kind of been able to do that, over a couple of weeks, but now Ulster Stormers was last Friday. Now Bordeaux, as I said, could be a different story this weekend, but the feel-good factor, is it back in Ulster?
That's it, 3 wins in a row. They were above Munster at one point over the weekend, so yeah, they're flying.
Yeah, so Luke, Champions Cup, it feels like a big weekend. I mentioned that you have the two matches there, Leinster Harlequins, La Rochelle Munster. We'll focus on La Rochelle Munster first, and before we get to it, I suppose the Munster Connacht game as well, which was the big one last weekend in McHale Park. Good atmosphere, good crowd. I thought a good game as well. Like in classic Connacht fashion in recent weeks, there's plenty of drama and talking points. You know, Jack Crowley was a guy we talked about last week who didn't play against Glasgow. We were lamenting the fact that it was a missed opportunity for him, but I thought he was really, really good when he finally did get the opportunity.
Yeah, just probably a week too late, really. But yeah, no, look, I thought he was fantastic. It was great to see. It must have been a bumpy enough ride from the last couple of months. I was going to say weeks, but you know, I think having Craig Casey there as well, that does help. It probably suits his game a little bit more as well, that little bit of extra pace there. So yeah, no, really pleased for him. I think we were fearing a little bit, weren't we, last week about whether or not he'd be ready for this coming week of cup action. But I think he looks in great shape. Looks like he's settled right back into the role there. Team are obviously very comfortable with him. It's not a case of that with him. It's just more, did he have enough rugby in the legs?
Getting his eye in as well.
But like playing an Interpro is always like that. It always goes up a little bit in terms of level than it does versus other players in the league. I think maybe when you get to the qualifiers, when you get to the qualification stage and you're kind of getting the knockout stage of the league, it does go up another level. But other than that, outside of like just regular season, I'm going to call them regular season games, Americanise the whole thing. But I think the Interpros are the ones that always stand out in the fixture list, really, don't they? So he's in good shape. It looks like it's been a good decision then to rest him. And last week, albeit they lost the game, but I think they go in pretty good shape for what is a monster game the weekend. Obviously, you've got all the exterior stuff, but it's still a big game for them. And I don't think anyone would really want to see Munster at this stage. I think they're still a team that can produce a big performance. They've got some good, their pack is pretty gritty. I think, La Rochelle will obviously fancy themselves. They're just so big and strong, and they're at home, of course. But I don't know, Munster are just they're tricky, aren't they? They'd be a team I wouldn't want to see. I know we have our complaints about them here and there, but I just wouldn't want to see them in a knockout game. I still think they've got a big scalp in them in a big game. So I'm excited about that one. I hope they give a good account of themselves in a big day.
Yeah, Jonathan, and we were talking last week when that injury update came in, like just before we started recording. Like they look like a lot more formidable team now. Craig Casey back, Sean Klein coming off the bench, getting that steal at the end. I suppose there's still a bit of a question mark about Peter O'Mahony. John Hodgman let for the leg injury. There's a question mark over him as well. Like you'd want both of those guys definitely, going up against La Rochelle. Like Thomas Ahern played really well, I thought, again at the weekend. I think it's a great shop window for like likes of himself and Coombs, who we discussed obviously too last week. All of a sudden, I think they're going to La Rochelle in a really, really good place. Or am I buying into it a little too much?
No, I think that's a fair enough assessment. Like whenever you saw the list of players that were coming back last week for the Connacht game, they all of a sudden looked a lot stronger. I think the way that Craig Casey played in that game as well is obviously a massive boost, because there was no guarantee that he was going to come in and look that sharp, having not played since December. And you mentioned the Jean Klein line-out steal at the end there that really sealed the win. I suppose that's almost an ideal way for him to get back into things as well. So they look an awful lot stronger on paper. The way that the players came in and hit the ground running, I think is massive for them. We talked an awful lot about Crowley last week, as we said, but maybe that mental reset, I suppose, of having that week, he looked all the better for that as well. And I suppose just the mood music around the place is going to be an awful lot more positive. I would guess that if Peter O'Mahony's in return to full training today, that he's going to play as well. That's going to be massive. And then obviously you got to contrast with how things are going for La Rochelle as well, and it just continues to get worse and worse for ROG over there. So if we were talking about this fixture in January, I think we would have said that Munster were going over with a puncher's chance and a little more than that. But not, when you look at it now, the way the results have gone for La Rochelle since, and just how Munster, I suppose, have slowly built back up over the last couple of weeks to what looks like a ruder picture of health, then I think they're going over with a real chance for what should be the tie of the weekend.
Come to La Rochelle in a minute, Luke, but Jonathan mentioned Craig Casey, and you touched on him as well. Like, I almost kind of forgot about him for a while during the Six Nations because he got that knee injury against Cast. Kind of there was expectation he might get back at some stage, but kind of just slipped my mind as a figure in Irish rugby. Ireland really could have done with him during that Six Nations, to go alongside Gibson Park, who started the tournament really well and then kind of fizzled out a bit towards the end. I feel like Craig Casey's impetus could have been pretty impactful.
Yeah, it could have been. And I think, look, I would say the Irish pack probably, weren't as dominant in the latter stages of the competition too, and there's always a knock-on effect for your nine there. So wouldn't say it's all down to Gibson Park in terms of that, but I would agree that's definitely how it was. That's definitely how it looked, and it would have been nice, as you say, to have someone who can maybe inject a little bit of pace in there. So yeah, look, he's in a good position now, isn't he? I think sometimes absence makes the heart grow fonder, as they say, and I'd certainly look. I'd heard that from Johnny Sexton about him, actually. He's a big fan of his. I think he says apparently he's a great trainer, a very positive guy around the setup and that. So you can see he's put the work in because that's a serious injury he got. So yeah, fair play for getting back in and being able to hit the ground running, as Jonathan said. It's that's having had a bit of experience in the area, it's not that easy a thing to do, and particularly as a nine, because you got to have a feel for the game. You got to, it's a lot of positioning yourself in the right place, a lot of anticipation, a lot of feel for the game. I think in terms of how you play it, you have to feel like, well, do I slow this one down or do I speed it up, or do we take one more phase here? There's lots of things I think that come with that position. It's very similar to that 10 role where not as easy to just step back in and just kind of seamlessly fill in a very technical position. So he's obviously put the work in. It's good to see, and I think that partnership with Crowley is vital for Munster, who I think, do we hear some rumblings as well? Does it sound like he might be staying?
Jack Crowley, it looks like that. Turning down a big offer from Leicester, it appears to stay on. Casey hit him with a great pass for that try at the weekend as well. Yeah, really, it was a defence splitter. Jonathan, you mentioned La Rochelle there, like as you mentioned, after the Leinster game, even though they lost, it was kind of seen as potentially a renewal of La Rochelle or an indication that they can still compete at the top table. That was the first of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 defeats in a row. Then they drew one match and lost again at the weekend to Clermont. So out of 8 matches they've played since beating Toulouse on January 4th, they've lost 7 and drawn 1. It's kind of a staggering collapse in terms of their form line. And, some of it maybe mitigation about Six Nations and players away, but for a good chunk of those games they have had their star players. Like they lost at home to Benetton the following week, away to Benetton after they lost to Leinster. And then since the Six Nations, like a draw at home to Cass and a fairly comprehensive defeat to Clermont. Few injury question marks over like guys this weekend as well. Like Paul Boudon looks like he'll be missing. Carbarlo I think will be missing. Dante is a question mark. Very interesting place for Rog. Like it was kind of his career was only on one track up until now. It was going forward and ascending. Interesting to see how he can kind of pull himself out of this, because if they lose this weekend, France is a very volatile culture when it comes to coaching and making swift decisions. It's very fascinating to see what his future holds.
Yeah, especially when you look down the table, because the top 14 being what it is, and we know that it's not the same as the ERC, for example, where the worst teams will pick up points because teams have such proud home records. So as much as they're trying to get into the playoffs, they also have to have at least one eye looking over the shoulder as well, because they don't want to get embroiled in a relegation battle. And it's a distinct possibility when you look at the table that it could happen if their results don't improve. And it is really, I suppose, the story of the European rugby season so far, because like I remember whenever we were talking about that game, whenever they beat the Toulouse Espoirs essentially back in January, we were talking about, how they got out of jail there and how this could have been a really bad result. But can you imagine saying then that they wouldn't win again until this point. I mean, it's an incredible run that they've been on, and I suppose from our perspective, if you're looking at it from how things are going from O'Gara, I know Rory had the piece during the week that he has earned the time to turn things around, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. But the interesting element, I suppose, from O'Gara's perspective is, he's come out and he's criticised the team at one point, and you haven't got the reaction, and then he's come out and he's sort of gone for the more softly approach, and you haven't got the reaction. So these things, whenever you get in these runs as a rugby team, it must be incredibly hard to know what to do, because it feels like no matter what he's trying, he's not getting the required response, at least in terms of the results as well. So this feels to me like it could be something that completely energizes the team. This fixture, and I suppose the personal nature of this fixture for O'Gara as well, could be something that almost wipes the slate clean, or it could be, as you say, it could be a result that really casts the season in a completely different light if they were to go out of Europe at home in anything other than a fighting fashion. I think would really colour the rest of the season moving forward. And domestically, that could, as unlikely as it would have seemed, could involve just trying to get enough points for survival rather than thinking about the playoffs.
Look, it's funny, like, I feel like for Ron O'Gara, his success against Leinster, I feel like it was easy for him to kind of get to that emotional pitch because he always hated Leinster. He was a classic La Rochelle of the underdogs. They're the big team with the big budget. I'm interested to see if he can have the same impact. Is he able to kind of hit the same pitch when it's Munster coming to town, who are they're the big underdogs? It's his home team, his legendary connection he has with the province. Like, I'm sure he was saying all sorts about Leinster behind closed doors to those players to amp them up. I wonder, honestly, will he be able to deliver that same kind of punch in the team talks when it's such a team close to his heart? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too sentimental.
I'd say, knowing Rog a little bit, I'd say you are being a little bit too sentimental. The guy is a ruthless winner. Like, if you were playing tiddlywinks with him, I'd say he'd be, never having played tiddlywinks, but apparently, it's not that competitive. But he would be incredibly competitive at that. I don't know. I think the thing for him this week may be the other side, is where he doesn't really go the emotional pitch for this, but that he just goes absolutely ruthless. And there'd be a part of it where, like, I want this one bad, because, like, you always want to beat your home, or a team that because it sounds like he wasn't even, maybe he didn't put himself forward for the process, but it didn't really sound like he was considered for the Munster role. It sounds like he's kind of ruled himself out. Yeah, it sounds like he's nearly ruled himself out. So that's a weird dynamic there as well. But you probably want to prove that if you're not above the role, but if you are, at some point thinking maybe you'd like it.
There is a sense that he's above it, as in some of his comments, his criticisms about the setup and what goes on behind the scenes does indicate to me, reading his comments or listening to him on other podcasts, that he thinks that I've attained a stat. I'm international.
I think above it is probably wrong. I wish I could retract that. I don't think it's above it. I think he probably feels like he's very strategic, I would imagine. Whenever you hear him talking, he's like, even how he talks, he's very considered. And I would say he's looking at the Munster thing going, okay, financially, under pressure, how are they going to compete in the league? Do they have as many young players coming through? I actually think they do have, but just not to the same extent as Leinster. And then he probably looks at his La Rochelle setup and says, well, I've got a big budget here. I've got some winners. I've got, I'd say he's looking at the two things quite cold and quite strategically. And I think that's probably what's that. I wouldn't say he'd ever think he'd be above the role, because there's not that many people above that role in club rugby. It's still a magic role to me. Like, if it was one of the jobs, like if you were looking for a job, to me that'd be one of the prime ones. If I was in the rugby game and I was coaching, Munster would be right up there for me. Sounds like a weird thing to say, but I've never really had that hatred for Munster just because I live down there, a lot of pals down there, but I think it's still a top job. So I think he was looking at that going, where am I getting the win here? I think he's a serial winner too, So obviously going through a bit of a patchy spot with La Rochelle, but I'd imagine he might try and take a little bit of the emotion out of it, but also say, look, lads, I want this one bad, which is okay to want.
Well, it's funny, Jonathan, because since Rog went to the coaching, they've hired probably 5 coaches, I think. They hired Anthony Foley, and then Rassie Erasmus, and then Johan van Graan, and then Graham Roundtree, and now Clayton McMillan. It's a lot of coaches they've hired when, the legendary figure that is Ronan O'Gara could have, people would have always wanted him in there if you were a Munster supporter. But there's just been kind of a sense that I think his sights are set like international level. Or
was there a bit, and I'd be interested to get John just to tie on to Will's question. Part of me always felt like he was only really in the running around the Roundtree when they were kind of appointing Roundtree, even though he was talked about. Felt like he was earlier in the coaching journey and wanted to do the head coaching role. Maybe I'm wrong on that one. Would you have a view on that one?
Oh, I think that's exactly it. I think if we look at when the job has come up during O'Gara's coaching career, I think he did the sensible thing, because he went to Racing, which immediately took him out of the Munster bubble, took him out of the Irish rugby bubble. He was learning something, learning a new trade, but also learning a new system for the first time in his professional life, because he'd only been Munster and Ireland. And then to go to the Crusaders, who at that time were the gold standard of club rugby, I think was the most canny thing that he could have done in his coaching career, to go down there and learn in New Zealand, not just in New Zealand, but specifically at the Crusaders, and then to end up in a job like La Rochelle again, to learn how to be a head coach in the top 14. I think everything he's done has been incredibly clever. I don't think, to my mind, there was ever an opportune time for him to take the Munster job. And I think Paul O'Connell sort of said similar things of, you don't want to be walking into that job, a job that means so much to you personally, a job that means so much to all of your friends and all of your family. I think that's a big thing to take on, and would have been a huge thing to take on at that stage of his coaching career. And the impression that I get of him now is that he views his next step as moving into the test arena. I don't think that if he's looking at it completely objectively, it's not at all that I would say that he thinks that he's above Munster. As outspoken as he has been about the way that Munster are run, some of the other things that go around Munster, that's what makes him so interesting to listen to and so interesting to read. But I just think that he has his sights set on a test job, and it's one of those things that, because he's had such success, he's won the two Champions Cups, I think it's just put him into that rarefied arena of being able to target not just a test job, but a good test job. Whenever he was on the BBC's coverage during the Six Nations, at the time, whenever the Australia job had come up, he was very interesting in what he said about the types of job that would attract you. And it's not just any test job; it's a test job under the right scenario. In his mind, a team that he can take to win the World Cup. So I think that's next on his agenda. I know, we've spoken about it before, the tie-in with his contract being up in 2027 and Andy Farrell's contract being up in 2027, and whether that's a natural sort of dovetail. Obviously, Simon Easterby might have something to say about that as well. But if we're looking at what's going on at La Rochelle from that perspective, I think it's, these decisions could be being taken in the next 18 months. So Ronan O'Gara turning this around, getting La Rochelle back to where he had them a year ago, from our perspective in Ireland, is a fascinating thing to watch from afar as well.
And I think as well, Will, what will be interesting about this little period for ROG is that it's probably the first time that he's long enough with a team that, he probably has to see a little bit of turnover of guys. Some of those names that you mentioned, so Carvalho, Dante, Uni Antonio. Now, he's obviously still international, but he's these are kind of older guys. So there's a little bit of that going on with them. So does he have the kind of Ferguson piece that you need to be a top, the really top quality club coaches can always make that little transition through, or else they move on. Do you know that kind of way? So either you get the timing right and you pull the parachute just when things are kind of at the top and you can kind of see the end, or you go through this period where, how does he get this? What's the next journey for this team? Can he be the guy that picks a few young guns, or does he, get a few other kind of gnarled veterans in, and does he exit a few of the other guys? So he's probably going through that little period too, I think. So
they've already announced that Nolan Legorek is coming from Racing at the end of the year. He's a really good scrum half. I think Carvalho is leaving at the end of the year, so that's one area they'll be renewing. Yeah. They're getting David Nishika, I can't pronounce his surname, the full back from Georgia who plays for Leon. Bit of a mouthful to pronounce, but he's a very good player as well. So he's coming in too. And it's an important period for his career, also in the sense that he's had the success. I would maintain that winning those back-to-back Champions Cups the way La Rochelle did is as impressive a coaching feat as I've seen since I've started following rugby, if since I've started working doing this show, I put that up against anything. Like La Rochelle, it's easy to say, oh, they have a huge budget. Lots of teams have big budgets. Like Stuart Lancaster just went to Racing and didn't last 2 seasons. Like what Rog did with La Rochelle for me is still unbelievably impressive, and does mark him out, as Jonathan says, as a coach who warrants test will be highest level test consideration. But that's why this period is such an important one for him.
This is important. It's key, isn't it? I think.
You know, as I said, there's cavalry coming over the hill at the end of the season, but the season is ongoing. There's still matches to be played. So like,
can he salvage something?
Can he salvage something? Exactly. Yeah, and like the thing is in France though is I watched the La Rochelle Stade Francais game a couple of weeks ago. I was streaming it, and Will Skelton got sent off in the first half, and it cut to the La Rochelle president, who was in the Stade Francais kind of bigwigs box, and he stood up, shook hands with all the Stade Francais guys, and the Canal Plus cameras followed him walking down the steps onto the pitch, up to the dugout, and goes up to like Rog and Skelton, and then all of a sudden like someone puts their hand in front of the camera and is like pushing it away. It's like, this is what you're dealing with in France. Like, it's volatile. Like
I've heard some horror stories.
The owners aren't like, Mick Dawson, who used to run Leinster. Like, it's a very different set of people.
Well, it's a funny place to play. They're a volatile enough bunch. We could see that from their performances in Six Nations, even. The English one obviously stands out, and then you see the brilliant performance against Ireland. But it's in the French mentality, and I think that definitely feeds through to some of the games. And when you have like a benefactor, kind of, who the club completely relies upon, they're putting their hard-earned money behind that. I think, probably entitled to go in.
Jonathan, just on the Connacht side then of last weekend, 24-30 defeat at home, and again conceding like a bonus point try to the opposition. I think they've conceded 13 tries in their last 3 matches against Benetton, Ospreys and Munster. Not exactly a murderer's row of attacks, like, decent teams, but not unbelievable. And again, like some really promising moments. Like I thought Hugh Gavin, Finn Tracy, 2 young backs were really, really good. But then conceding really sloppy tries, missing touch. But Josh Ioane, it's been a bad, that's been one of his downfalls all season. Some really poor attempts at kicking the touch. A few block kicks, a few missed conversions as well. Again, like it encapsulates Connacht's season really. Some great moments, but then some head scratching moments and some kind of hair pulling out moments.
Yeah, like the misses to touch are just are incredible, really, aren't they? Because it's an issue that keeps rearing its head, and I'd actually be interested to see whether Hanrahan actually gets the nod against Cardiff this week, purely for that reason, because we have seen Josh Ioane tear it up, like 2 weeks ago. He looked really good. And he's such a good running rugby 10. He's obviously like, you don't play for the All Blacks unless you've got something about you, but like, his seeming inability to find touch with any sort of regularity it's really, really costing Connacht. And I mean, as you say, like there were good elements of that performance. I thought Mac Hansen was probably the pick of the bunch for them. Whenever they bring him in at first receiver and just change the picture for the opposition defence, it's really, really effective in the way that they attack. But even I think like had they nailed the line out at the end and got over for the try, I think it would have been a real smash and grab victory, even though they were playing against 14 men for such a huge swathe of the game. But they're, I find them quite confusing to watch. Like they're enjoyable to watch in the sense that the games tend to be a spectacle, and whether they are far ahead or far behind, the game isn't over. So like they're great to watch from a neutral perspective, but like the coaches must just be banging their heads week after week at some of the things that they do and the way that they let opposition off the hook at times as well, because I think their season will come down to how we judge their season will come down to how they go in the Challenge Cup the rest of the way here. But I still think that there's a chance for them in this competition, but they really do need to sort of tidy up those errors that, the type of errors that we would call coach killers, really, just those avoidable things. And it wasn't just Josh Ioane at the weekend, there were a number of them, but I think those missed attempts to touch really just sort of encapsulate it.
And they take pressure off the opposition fairly consistently, when they're in good positions. Like, that's when you need to be building, and you don't always get scores out of these things, but building pressure and having to, kind of that feeling of hanging on for a large period, it really takes, particularly your pack, if they're in, territorial positions and there's kind of pressures on throw and things like that, or you're defending constantly. Yes, you get a lift every now and then, but if you're consistently in those positions, for longer periods. The Connacht just let teams off the hook too much. And then as well, like, you'd have to say, just consistently defensively, they're just too leaky. They're just too leaky, guys. You know, you can't.
Craig Casey try with Nash kind of.
You just can't have it, Will. You know,
Cordero makes contact with him like 45 metres from the try line, and 2 seconds later it's under the sticks.
But they're the ones that kill you as a team. They kill your own pack. So we're talking about letting the other pack off the hook. They kill your own pack. To be kind of conceding so easily, and then you're chasing everything all the time, and you've got to play loose, and that's maybe why they look so good sometimes, because they've got to be playing. They're nearly chasing tries all the time. But you know, conceding 30 is still a lot of points. You know, if you want to get to the next level, you got to be keeping teams down lower than that, and taking a little bit of pressure off your attack. And I just think, you know, to just relieve pressure too often on the opposition, whether it's through, you know, a leaky defensive piece and an easy try, or vice versa, as Jonathan's alluded to, like the kicks are the fairly obvious one in attack for them. You know, you can see they've got the quality going forward. It's not a quality issue. You know, you can see they get tries, but they're just too leaky on all those kind of aspects. The pressure piece in the game, they just haven't got that figured out. They're just relieving pressure valves and putting pressure on themselves at times when they really don't need to do that. So yeah, it's great to watch, but you've kind of heard me going on a couple of weeks in a row about them. Frustrating. It must be frustrating for the supporters, because we were talking about it like, was it last week? Maybe it was the week before last. I can't remember. It was recent enough. We were kind of saying, oh, they'd be great to watch. And I was kind of saying, would they be great to watch though? Like that would hurt me as a supporter watching them going, I still want my team to defend well as well when I'm watching them. I'm passionate about that. I'd love seeing like Leinster on the weekend, who we'll come to, some of the hits, some of the, you know, they were kind of showing up for each other in big moments. Like, I'm roaring at my TV at those ones too. You know what I mean? That gets me up off the couch. Some of the O'Brien tackles get me up off the couch. You know what I mean? So, I think most real rugby supporters love they love the contact of the sport too. It's a big draw of the game. And seeing your guys put in a big defensive effort, it means a lot to me too as a supporter, you know. So I'm sure the Connacht supporters aren't different to that too.
Well, they've conceded at least 30 points in their last 3 matches, as I said, against Benetton, Ospreys and Munster. And more kind of coaching upheaval during the week. It was announced that Billy Millard, who's left Harlequins as director of rugby, or he will be leaving at the end of the season, is going to be coming into Connacht in an as yet undefined role. Pete Wilkins is still on sick leave. They've already announced Rod Sieb is coming in as a senior coach from Australia. So lots of kind of upheaval, I suppose. We don't really know what the coaching staff will look like next year. But as I said, Hugh Gavin, Finn Tracy, thought Sean Jansen was really good as well. Real powerful back row. They're guys I'd like to see in that summer tour whenever the squad is finally named in a couple of weeks.
Prendergast is all right. That looked like he's
not playing this weekend anyway. So
he's definitely all right.
Yeah, what did you make of the incident? Red card for you?
Yeah,
because Munster are appealing it. Obviously, they want Nancy for this weekend.
Yeah, I think it was on the edge though. It's not I think it probably is on balance. Yeah. You feel the same?
Yeah, I like he makes contact with the head. I remember, actually, similar to one Abundi Aki did in South Africa like 2 years ago against the Stormers, and the guy got similarly kind of badly injured in the incident. And
I think if you take the injury out, you got to look at it itself. I just think I think with the rules now, I think it probably is.
But if you take the injury out, is he getting the right card, do you think? Like, literally, do you actually think they're going to give the red? I don't know if they do, to be honest.
Well, if you think about just technically,
I know you're meant to take that out, but I do think they might not have given a red if he hadn't have been injured.
Yeah, maybe not. Sorry, yeah, but no, sorry, that definitely plays in. I'm more asking you, but if you take it out, is it still a red for you? I think technically it probably is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It is shoulder to the head. So,
any view on that, Johnny?
I think he was slightly unfortunate, just in the sense that what we were saying about the outcome of the tackle, and I thought it was interesting that the outcome was mentioned. It was picked up on the ref mic, saying that Prendergast had been knocked out, which I think is interesting in the sense that it probably shouldn't come into play. Like, I was off Saturday, so just watching the game with my dad and my brother, and we were divided in real time in the sense that instantly I thought it was a red card. My brother did, and my dad wasn't sure, and I think that maybe just shows that it was a debate to it, And I think whenever you watch the replay closer, what I hadn't picked up in real time was that the possibility that it's actually the knee that does the damage rather than the arm in the clear out. And I think it's not one of those ones like we would say as sort of Peter O'Mahony against Wales being the sort of famous example of that clear out with the arm detached, and I think it was to my mind, it was maybe just about a red card, but I think it was a lot closer than I probably initially thought anyway.
Yeah, fair. I think that's fair.
I'll be interested to see, what the outcome of that hearing is, because you don't. Yeah, you see, I suppose sometimes people appealing.
He's great. I really like him.
He's a
good player.
He is a physical player, obviously.
Very
Yeah, obviously.
I like him a lot. Every time I watch him, I'm kind of impressed with him.
You want him in La Rochelle, like this is
100%.
this is one you do want.
Particularly if Dante's back.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that they're really going after it in terms of trying to
And
get.
he's already been red carded for Munster as well, so it's one of those bans where you wouldn't think that he would get the mitigation as well if it is upheld.
I think that was the URC semi-final, was it, against Glasgow? I think he definitely picked that one up. Yeah, so that'll be an interesting one. You mentioned the Leinster game, Leinster 10, Sharks 7. Not the scoreline people were expecting, needless to say, especially when a couple of the key guys who had played against the Bulls went back to Dublin. So did Jack Neenaber, so did Tyler Blayendale, but very impressive win, and actually a crucial win if you're forecasting down the line and looking at permutations if Leinster are to progress in Europe. Like they play Glasgow on the last day of the season, potentially this win gives them a little bit of a buffer that game might not be like one they have to have, which opens up possibilities. But that's getting ahead of ourselves in terms of this Saturday. What impressed you about them? Because Leinster were missing like literally 20 players from their starting team.
Literally nearly everything impressed me about it. Honestly, I just thought it was a really gritty performance. I think obviously, in attack, they probably left one or two bits. They were a little bit untidy. I thought Frawley had a few moments where you're kind of going, that could have been better, a few moments like that. But I feel for him, like he just is gone. Sorry, not that he was bad at it, but he just had a few moments.
Where does he go from here? I was going to ask you about him generally, but you brought him up first. His confidence just must be on the floor from November. I feel
bizarre.
I feel like it's one of those moments of his career, that could really really.
But he needed to be playing regularly then after that. But obviously that completely went out the window as well. And then he's playing different positions when he's playing all this kind of stuff. Injury thing, a few bits have happened in the intervening period, which has really not helped him. But he looked like a guy who hadn't played much. Do you know what I mean? He was dropping, for some of the kicks and thinking about the cross fields. There were some odd kicks for a guy who was really felt like he was on top of his kicking game. You have the drop goals. He's kicking the ball a mile. He has the one against La Rochelle last year in the group where he kicks it from. You felt like he was all over his kicking game, and then all of a sudden it's kind of he just looked uncomfortable there to me.
Even the conversion, I know anyone can miss a kick, but it's a sloppy misconversion. It's basically in front of the post.
Very sloppy kick, yeah. So I don't have much. I have sympathy for him, but he's got to be better. He's a better player than what he showed in the weekend. He was just a little bit sloppy in some of those areas. So maybe that's the one area where I kind of think maybe he had some great physical stuff and he took a lovely hit. He took the hit well from the charge down, which is kind of a big one. But yeah, that was a little bit. I'd love to see him doing better. I thought he was playing great for Leinster before November. So that was maybe the little bit disappointing. But he wasn't unbelievably bad. But everything else, some of the young guns, brilliant, fiery. Gritty performance, got stuck into the South Africans is absolutely key there. And anytime you go kind of toe to toe with the South African team and come out on top, I love those ones. Like it's such a difficult place to go and get a win. And you think about some of the names that are out there for the Sharks. I think. They'll get huge confidence from that.
What about Tommy O'Brien? We discussed him last week. I think he has to start this weekend. I know he's played 2 matches in South Africa back to back, but I just feel like the right wing slot is open. I'd love to see him get it.
Oh, I think he's a little bit more natural there than Osborne too.
Why? What's this? I feel like there's a narrative out there that
it's because he played so well at fullback against South Africa. And
that's fullback and wing.
Very different. I agree with you. I think there are different positions, but I think that's probably why. If you're asking me why, that's why I think is because he's such a good player and he's been brilliant at fullback. But if you ask me who's better for Leinster in the wing, I'd have to say I think Tommy O'Brien looks like he's a good fit. Like he looks really quick. His tackling was great. He timed some of those hits brilliantly well on Mapimpi. Really good technique as well. There was nothing dodgy about them. Like they were just really good, clean hits, and dug the team out of a few kind of holes as well. So very impressed with him. Very impressed with Tector. I thought Tector looked very physical at times as well. He really hung in there quite well. Do you know who was fantastic? I'm drawn this is terrible.
Opposition.
I'm stuck on Doris. Deegan was brilliant. Deegan was brilliant throughout the game. Carried so well. Had a few kind of big rampaging runs where they kind of couldn't get a hold of him. I was really impressed with Deegan. I think he's actually, every time I've seen him this season, I think he's been playing quite well. I don't know if you What do you make of him?
Well, I loved him jumping into the water.
That was class too. Yeah,
Swimming pool.
Shallow enough actually.
Oh yeah. I hope he checked the depth because he jumps like straight over.
Sorry, he definitely didn't.
But whenever I've been watching the games in Durban, I just like a water slide and swim pool. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But it was good to see someone jump into it.
It's good to see. No, but I thought he was brilliant. And look, he questioned the referee quite. He was all over it. But there was one point where Khaleesi was walking. I think it was at half time, and I quite liked it. You could see he was blown when he was asking the ref the questions. Because he's not playing every week, and South Africa really does take it out of you in the pace of the game. But Khaleesi's talking to the ref on the way off, and I'm thinking there's a real he spotted it and walked right in next to the referee. Kind of dipped the ear into the conversation just to make sure he knew he was there. I just thought that's kind of for a young enough guy, not experienced captain. I was impressed by him. I thought he was great in the weekend. I'm really pleased because he's a guy who
been around a while now.
A while. We were talking about him for ages, and there was always this chat about, does he kind of have you can see he's a great top of the ground runner. And I always felt like when he went out of favour, and you see Doris, and you see who else he's competing with in there, like I always felt like I wonder should he have gone. But maybe he gets a little bit of pay and he kind of ends up in that kind of critical role for Leinster, like a Rhys Ruddock, who didn't play much international rugby but was absolutely key to kind of Leinster's success. Does he kind of fill that void maybe that Rhys leaves and become an integral part of the squad? Because I don't think at this stage he's probably usurping Doris. And I think Conan's playing out of his skin as well at the moment, so I just don't see that happening. But God, he was really good in the weekend.
Oh, he's a good player.
And he was good too, actually, by the way. I must give a bit of credit. He's a guy I've been, critical of just around his size. And he's like, no, you can always see he's a great player. I always just wonder about going to the next level. But playing against the Sharks pack, like that line he took, burst through the tackle too.
There's a good video of the final whistle of all the players, the young guys celebrating, because for them, like realistically, that's like the highest.
Probably the last shop window
they're gonna get probably, or certainly one of the most high profile ones. And like to be fair, like that Sharks team had a lot of quality in it. Like it was a full Springbok front row. Khaleesi was playing, Andre Esterhuizen with Pimpy. Like the Sharks really are one of the
weird.
They're like you know what. Outside of like 2 games against Munster, one in the Champions Cup and one earlier this season when they were unbelievable, had their full team and smoked Munster, they're actually been pretty shite since they've joined the URC, despite having really strong teams most of the time they play.
Weird.
It's just bizarre how poor they are. Like if I was a Sharks supporter, I would be absolutely fuming at that. Like to lose to that Leinster team, and I know we're obviously giving Leinster the credit, they played well, but
they defended their hearts out well. They were good.
But for the Sharks to only score 7 points, with the team that had out,
I thought they rode. I will say one thing. I thought at the start of the game when Leinster went on that penalty run, I thought they were pretty lucky to get away with it. I thought they were pretty cynical during that period. Thought the referee let them off a little bit in that just during that little period. So I don't know, John. Any thoughts on the game? Did you catch it? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, Deegan. I think I would absolutely agree. Deegan was the main takeaway for me. I think the move to 8 really suited him. I think that's probably his best position. But to me, it's an interesting case because if you look at him, he's played 3 of the 4 Champions Cup games for Leinster already this season. So he is getting his chances, but you just would love to see him, I suppose, cement a place in that starting team where it's almost automatic. But then it's how do you do it?
He always felt like an ideal candidate for Ulster, Jonathan. An
100%.
Deegan to Ulster has been the most rumoured transfer, I think, in the history of Irish rugby transfers.
Because it was rumoured 3 separate times.
Yeah, but it always felt like he's the perfect fit for them up there. They're lacking a bit of ball carrying ability outside. It has always been Henderson, but the last couple of years, he's an older player. I feel like he's a really nice balance for that back row. And now they've obviously gone and got a pretty, I can't remember his name, but the guy from Northampton is a lovely player. Augustus. Yeah, he looks good and he looks very powerful. But I always felt like Deegan would be perfect up there, and if he was in the shop window, I felt like the Irish team would be open to him if he played well in Ulster. But many times, maybe even hurt by that one a few too many times to cover that ground again.
As soon as Jack Conan turned Ulster down, then I think they moved their attention to Max Deegan, and it was going on for years. And I think Saturday to me was just a reminder of how good he is and how good he could be, and I think it's just, to me, it's a shame that we're not going to see more of him, because you would presume that, with Conan playing the way he's been playing, Keelan Doris is Keelan Doris, and Josh van der Flier is going to play 7. So, guys, like Deegan, Will Connors, like Scott Penny. It's one of those things, I suppose, where there hasn't been an ability to entice from the other provinces, and it's their, it's their prerogative. I think they probably play enough and probably enjoy playing where they are for their home province enough that they haven't been tempted to leave. And maybe looking at the situation that there's been, I suppose, specifically in Ulster, but though the making a success of those interprovincial transfers hasn't really been widespread. Cooney's obviously incredible and has been incredible for Ulster, but I suppose he wasn't leaving his native province to come to Ulster. He was leaving Connacht. Like Conway's probably the best example. Yeah,
Byrne the best one.
Again,
he was cut though, and he went to Scarlets. Yeah. Like Conway is probably a good one.
Conway, Felix Jones is a great one. Yeah. Niall
like Ty Byrne went to the Scarlets first, and then he worked his way back. It's slightly different. Jonathan, I want to get your opinion on Frawley. Like we discussed him there. Like it's funny. I was just thinking, obviously Leinster playing Quins this weekend in Croke Park, and thinking back to the Leinster Munster game in Croke Park, which seems like lifetime ago, because that was like Frawley was starting that day. Leinster were blitzed Munster early doors, and it looked like it was Frawley's jersey. It was his time to kick on with Leinster and maybe Ireland in November, and now he's miles away from the international picture, miles away from starting for Leinster. Not even his form isn't been good since then, and I can see why in terms of his confidence being on the floor. But what have you made of what do you make of where he is now and what he needs to do, I suppose, in the short to medium term to try to regain a bit of a foothold both at club and at country maybe?
Yeah, I think it's that confidence element, because we've always looked at him as a player who would excel with a run of games, but then whenever he has had those games now, he's just looked very shaky. And it's incredible, back in Durban where he had, I suppose, the high point of his career. Like it's incredible to think how things have changed for him between those two visits to that stadium. And he just does look like a player who needs to have that confidence rebuilt, where it's going to be a gradual thing. I don't think it's going to be he goes out and has one good game in the ERC and then all of a sudden everything's hunky-dory again. I don't know whether a part of it is just how much of a blow it would have been to come back from that South Africa tour, having felt that you've done all that you can, having played your part and been the headline act, and I suppose this historic victory for Ireland, and to then come back, go into November, for not to work out in November, and then we've spent everyone has spent so much time talking about Crowley and Prendergast. But I suppose if you look at the bigger picture, the wider picture of it all, the person who was most negatively impacted by it was Frawley, because he did what he did in the summer, and then I suppose to see somebody almost anointed ahead of him and somebody that is a provincial colleague, so he's losing out on two fronts. I think that must have been really, really difficult to deal with, and it's going to be interesting to see how Leinster build back that confidence and have him playing like the player that we know that he can be moving forward.
Yeah, I don't expect him to be in the 23 this weekend. I expect it to be Ross Byrne on the bench. I don't think that
depends what the composition is.
Yeah,
so 6-2, you gotta go
Frawley. Yeah,
it's a tricky one though, isn't it? Because November, it felt like he was unbelievably harshly treated, because he was brilliant for Leinster when he came back as well. It wasn't like he was. Remember, that was the
start of the season really well.
He was really, really good. He was riding high. He looked like Leinster kind of picked him and said, "Okay, he's going to be our guy." And it's been kind of, I wouldn't even say double whammy. It's kind of triple whammy. Like he doesn't really get a shot again in November. He gets a short opportunity, but then he has that blow up against Argentina where dropped a few balls, threw a few awful passes to people. Remember the one to I think it might have been to Murray or someone, but it was a walk-in try in a game they're kind of winning. Fiji, excuse me, sorry, but remember the one he throws into touch, but he smiles after it, and I was kind of going, ugh, that's not a good look at all for a coach. You know what I mean? You throw away a gilt-edged try, even if you're winning the game. And I don't know, I just feel like the pictures that he's put, that we've seen since of him, it's not a collapse, because that's really being way too harsh, but it doesn't look good. It looks like he's and the problem for him now is, I agree, Ross Byrne actually is, he comes out of last week, even though it's a loss, I think in quite good shape. Just in terms of how he's playing and where he sits, like
a conversion at the end as well.
Yeah, so he looks like he's in good shape, but Frawley to me looks like he's, I don't know if looks like he picked up a knock or whatever, but he doesn't look like he's in great shape coming out of this again. So is he further away? I think maybe yes. which I
And
didn't
that
think
says so much, because
doesn't it?
talking about,
Yeah.
you know, the fact that you're talking about him being behind Ross Byrne as a player who's less versatile, but also is leaving.
Yeah.
You know, there's no element of squad building where that would be seen as beneficial for the team, apart from the fact that Ross Byrne's form is such that in the short term he's seen as the better bet. But like, Frawley should have everything else going for him in this sort of selection debate, if you like.
It might actually mean they don't go 6-2 for that reason, because he's not like, they might not be able to trust him at the moment the way he's playing.
Well, my sense about him as a player is that he needs games. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And the problem for him now is that he's back in the same situation he found himself in.
Except the guy's younger this time.
Except the guy's younger. The guy looks like he's in kind of the front runner for the Irish team, which is a very different position than he found himself when he's kind of tying it, when he's mixing it up with Ross Byrne. It's not a Sexton situation, but it's like not that far off it either. I think they really love Prendergast. I think he's going to be the Irish 10 for a long period of time. I think Jack Crowley has his work cut out, rightly or wrongly. We all know our views on that. I think that's probably wrong, but I think that's maybe where the Ireland team sit at the moment. Yeah, it's a tricky one for him. He's in a tough position again, whereby he's probably going to be living off scraps. They seem to play him in different positions and plug him in different holes, so he doesn't get the same looks every week. And what he has to be is unbelievably accurate in every time he goes on the pitch. And I just don't think he's great at that from what I've seen of him without playing the same position or without playing week to week. I just haven't seen that out of him yet. And it's what's required, whether he shifts his mindset to play very safe, which I don't actually think is his strength, because I think he looks like he can see the big play and he can execute the big play, as we've seen with him. But I just don't know if he's capable of that with minimal rugby, which might be the case for him. So I'm a little bit worried for him. I felt like he was in a great position, and now all of a sudden I'm just not seeing a clear gap for him to really stamp a claim down again and compete with Prendergast. I just don't see that at the moment.
It will be interesting to see how they select the team the next 2 weekends. Not only him, but Tommy O'Brien, as we mentioned as well. As we come towards the end, Jonathan, we started with Ulster. We'll give them a bit of love now as well. They're starting badly, and then there's being 17-0 down after 6 minutes.
How's your heart?
I was actually following the game on Flash Score, and I couldn't, before I got home, and I couldn't actually comprehend how they'd conceded so many points in such a short space of time. But to be fair, they rebounded well and were worthy winners, even though there was a few fairly hairy moments going on. One bit of a down point today, though, Robert Balakoon, a hamstring injury. He's gone for a scan already. It's a shame. He looked sharp, I thought, on Friday night, and now it looks like he could be maybe missing for a couple of weeks. Who knows? But what did you make of the whole evening, from the ridiculous start to how they kicked on and won the game?
Same experience the week before when I was doing the women's game and they were playing the Dragons, and you're looking at it and you're trying to wrap your head around only seeing the score flash up on your phone. But they're getting good at that. Because I was at the presser during the week before the game, and obviously the theme of the presser was, it's great that you can get out of these holes that you're digging for yourself, but obviously the next step is that to not put yourself in these positions in the first place, and then you go 17-0 down at home. But I think it's indicative of where the team are. It's indicative of how the team is not anywhere close to the finished article, but it is sort of like we were saying last week. Whenever you look at the team on paper, there is talented elements there. There is probably a lack of experience and a lack of game management, I would say, is a big part of it. There's still an awful lot of errors. We talk about Connacht's errors, like Ulster make some fairly silly mistakes as well, especially in defence. But I think to come back in those games and to have won 3 in a row, yes, the opposition have to be taken into account, and yes, the reality of the situation is that if they hadn't have won all these 3 games, I think their playoff place would have been in real jeopardy. I still think it could be a bridge too far for them when you look at the fixtures, but they were essentially in must-win scenarios the last 3 weeks, and despite difficulties of their own making, I think you have to credit them for getting the wins in each of those games. The most encouraging thing is probably the emergence of Jack Murphy at 10, because for somebody who's 20 years old, I think playing in the 10 jersey, I think it's been really impressive what he's managed to do over the last couple of weeks and months of the season, really, because it was a difficult position that he was in with Billy Burns having left over the summer, there not really being any experienced tens there in the team. And for him to come in, it looks like I've really sort of claimed the 10 jersey as his own. We'll probably find out more this weekend whenever we see the team for Bordeaux. But I would be massively surprised if he isn't starting in that game. And I think he's got a good skill set. He's got a good base to play from for a young 10 because his kicking is so good. His kicking off the tee and out of hand is so good that I think that will really help build his confidence in these scenarios. But I think he's got an eye for a gap as well. We saw his pass for the Balakoon try as well. I think he's got a good broad skill set, and I think the way that he's come into the team is probably one of the bright points over this winning run. And had we been recording this yesterday, you would have said the same about Balakoon coming back and being able to field that back three of Lowry, Balakoon, and Stockdale. But obviously, we now have to.
Lowry was electric, wasn't he? A few clips of him, yeah.
I think the blend in that back three, when all three of them are able to play together, is good. Obviously with Stockdale's aerial and kicking ability, Lowry's footwork, and Balakoon's just sheer gas, which is something that Ulster don't have, and really that there isn't elsewhere in Irish rugby either. Just the speed that he has, there's a good balance to that back three whenever you can get them all out together. But it's been so rare, and doesn't look like we're going to see it again for a while. So that would
be Balakoon. God, he looks like a fast twitch guy, doesn't he? A fella who just kind of picks up the soft, Like, that's a disaster for him. He needs to figure that out. He needs to figure out what's causing the issues for him, or whether it's a back. Sometimes these things all come from the back. I feel for him. It's a really, when you're on a run like that, he nearly needs to like almost start again a pre-season. Do you know that kind of way? Like I'd say he's dying for. I'd say the Ulster S&C staff are pretty dying for a pre-season.
It's been a last couple of seasons for him. I feel like he hasn't got a.
I think that's
any
right.
run.
I think he definitely has.
Yeah.
No.
Jonathan, in terms of the team selection, like Mark McCall has already said for Saracens, he's not going to bring the England internationals to Toulon. He sees it kind of as a lost cause, and he's already basically set out a stall. Do you expect Richie Murphy to pick his full-strength team, or is Bordeaux away such a foreboding proposition that he's just going to say, look, we need the league, we need to prioritise that? I'm going to, similar to maybe what they did in Toulouse, they might pick a few guys on the bench potentially, but just say the URC is our focus.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I didn't agree with it whenever they did it in Toulouse either, and I wouldn't agree with it if they were to do it this weekend. I think a European knockout game deserves your full team. I don't know what it would say for Ulster's.
I think you should get fined for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For a team like Ulster, I don't know what it would say, and I don't know what it would say to the fans either. If you go through these campaigns, 4 pool games, all with a view to making it through to the last 16, and then whenever you get to the last 16, if you were to just say, "Oh well, we've gone as far as we can now because we're not going to beat Bordeaux," especially when it's been such a bitty period of the season with the Six Nations, they're so lacking in Irish internationals that it's not like they've got a group of guys that are exhausted after the Six Nations. They should have guys that are looking to play rugby, and if, as we all expect them to, they do get beat, then they've got the down week the week after anyway before they're back in league action, and then there will be more breaks for European rugby as well. So they've only got potentially 4 games left after this one, so it hasn't been a particularly minutes heavy period for their players. So I would be looking to I would fully expect them to play their first choice 15, because the reality is, we're all talking about the point spread as it is. If they, things could get ugly. I know we're joking, but things could get drastically bad for them if they go over there with an understrength team, because this Bordeaux team at home could carve them up.
Yeah, and it's massively disappointing to see Mark McCall. I know
they should fine him.
He basically said after they lost at home to Cast and went to the wrong side of the draw, he basically decided then that they were going to just prioritise the Premiership. This is a team that won 3 Champions Cups in the recent past, and they're just going to Toulon. I thought that Toulon are the best team in Europe. Saracens could definitely go there and win with a full strength team, but he was basically making the calculation that even if we do that and win, we're going to be playing Toulouse away the following week, and then we want to go back to the Premiership and I
think it's shocking. I honestly think it's really bad form. I honestly think you're really shortchanging the competition. It's the Champions Cup. It's supposed to be for the top teams in Europe. You should be able to compete on both fronts. And if you're not, I get if you're struggling, but No, I think they should find those teams. It should hurt you if you're making those kind of decisions, particularly when he's been publicly saying that as well.
I mean, he's already announced.
You know what I mean? If you just pick a team, well, it's very hard to say. You could just say I have confidence in my guys, but when he comes out and says it, I'd fine him. I think definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Finish with predictions then. How do we see this weekend going? Look, I'll go to you first. The Irish teams, 4 Irish teams.
I'll start with Leinster. I think yes, a win for them. I think they win well enough, I'm going to say. Although there's
no Marcus Smith magic.
No, I do think they're tricky, but I think Leinster's defence is awesome. It really is awesome, and I think one thing I'd say is that you'd be a little bit concerned about guys coming back in having not played. That's the big uncertainty with the Leinster team at the moment, isn't it? That do they bed back in straight away, or have they built up habits in the Irish camp that are hard to kind of undo straight away? That's a tricky part, and as you say, tricky customers they're coming up against. So that's a challenge there. A little bit of uncertainty around that, but I think they'll have too much. Ulster, I think Ulster lose that one. I think Bordeaux have too much. They're at home. They're tricky at the best of times. But my hope is that it just doesn't get ugly, which it can do. Even if you pick your full team, it could get ugly against Bordeaux. I think that's actually the case for nearly any team that comes up against them, is that it could get ugly. Just the pace and that they have out wide. They're just so hard to contain. But I go Bordeaux there. I don't see Munster doing it, but I want to say, I want it to be a yes. I think there's some, but I think maybe La Rochelle arrest the decline and get the job done. I feel like it's a close one though. I think it's maybe a bit hairy, a little bit sweaty for ROG, but I think they get the job done.
I think Munster go and win there at the weekend.
Oh, nice!
I do. I do. Yeah, I don't think.
Couldn't wait to get that out.
Rochelle,
I didn't even ask you your predictions.
Rochelle have been playing well. I think the Munster have a lot of bodies back on deck. I think I'll go back to what I said. I don't think Rog is going to be able to get La Rochelle to the same pitch as he did when they played Leinster. I think that was an easier kind of red rag to a bull for him to get the guys ready to play the best.
It's a pick of the fixtures, though. I think there's a bit of a buzz about that. I think they'll be up for it there, and they're at home and they're playing crap, so I think maybe they get it done. I think. I also think Connacht get the job done.
Yeah. Well, if Cardiff,
Cardiff is tricky though. I think they're doing okay in the league and that.
Could be Racing coming to town potentially the following weekend if they beat Cardiff.
Would be a great one.
Yeah, that'd be a great one.
Big boost for them.
Jonathan, I'll give you the last word then. How do you see the matches going?
Yeah, I think Leinster will win handy enough. I think Ulster will be beaten handy enough. I think Connacht should win by a score, and I'm starting to think that Munster are going to win as well.
I could see you talking your way into that when you were talking about the game.
You know what it is? I think it's just I'm trying to temper my enthusiasm for being there and going to watch the game and being excited about going to the game with thinking that Munster are going to win and try it. But
are you
going over as well? I'll be there as well. I must say hello.
Will's going on a family jolly up.
Yeah, so, I'm going in a personal capacity, not a work capacity.
Well. No, I'm doing it because obviously the La Rochelle and Bordeaux are so close. It means that you can do the games back to back. So, I just think that having watched Munster get all those guys back, and I think if they get Peter O'Mahony back, because I think that this is the sort of game where Peter O'Mahony can make a big contribution for Munster, and I think if they get him back, allied to all the guys that they got back at the weekend, playing against a team that hasn't won since the start of January. I think they just have enough to win what could be a really, really good game.
I'm starting to believe it myself, lads. All this chat. Yeah, I think you're right. He could make a mess of that line out, and if you need to disrupt them at line out time because scrum's going to be ugly. But line out, if that's ugly too, it's a hard place to win. So maybe Pete's a very important piece for that. Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, that sets the scene nicely. I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on this week's episode of The Left Wing. We will be back next week to review the Champions Cup last 16. Until then, thanks so much for listening and goodbye.